Thanks, Bonnie, for the introduction. Hello, everybody. Thanks a lot to Wendy and to Thomas, wherever he is, for so wonderfully organizing the overall event, which already brings in the term in a bit of a blunt way. So my talk is about security and entertainment, organizing media. There is no organization without media. There is no media without organization. Or in Reinhold Martin's term from the book already mentioned, or in terms of verbs and actions, media organize, media are organized, organizing is mediated. Organizing then is the relational, socio-technical ordering and being ordered of humans, materials, effects, and techniques. From here, a world of phenomena and potential investigations and interventions opens up. With Volkswagen's cheating software, an obvious but too fresh point of departure, I here seek to ponder the layers or modalities of media organizing in the context of what has been called the security entertainment complex. If there's a bit of time left in the end, although I doubt it actually, I will return to the broader research landscape of organizing media. At this year's still ongoing Venice Biennale, one of the most remarkable works on display is Simon Denny's Secret Power. Representing New Zealand in the Biennale's exhausting mix of centrally curated show and dozens of national pavilions, the Berlin-based and New Zealand-born Denny has been called a post-internet artist. In other words, his is not a media art content with exploring what media technology can do to artistic production. Schooled in conceptualism, pop art, and minimalism, Denny rather investigates and makes present the images, rhetorics, and mechanisms, or perhaps the visual clutter, rhetorical noise, and hidden operations of contemporary netscapes. It is an art that takes pervasive digitization, or what we might call today's post-media condition, for granted, and that uses all sorts of artistic media to reflect on post-media constellations, in particular with regard to the digital economy. I won't go into his work, but in a recent solo exhibition at MoMA PS1 in New York, some of his pre-Biennale works were brought together. Among other things, the personal effects of Kim.com, recreation and reimagination of the confiscated items of the notorious internet entrepreneur, or New Management, a study of Samsung manuals, training materials, and corporate reliquaries. Also, for instance, Disruptive Berlin, sculptural portraits of 10 young media companies. According to the writer and critic Chris Kraus, Denny engages in a kind of anthropology of media culture. He identifies aspects of this culture and then transplants, remediates, and reorganizes them into the alien context and the bracketed spaces of museums and galleries. In its focus on organizational and entrepreneurial contexts, the artist's work manifests a kind of artistic organizational research. An anthropologist's eye is turned to the aesthetics of organization that shape and that are shaped by the age of ubiquitous computing and connectivity after digital media. This way, Denny investigates the contemporary configurations of what Reinhold Martin would probably call an organizational nexus, socio-technical orderings of what can be perceived and expressed, as well as the agents and the politics of these orderings. In this sense, Denny's work presents an investigation of organization and organize as terms of media. It challenges media theory to take the question of organization seriously, just as much as it challenges the study of organization, my field, if you want, to face the entanglements of media technologies and organized conduct. I therefore attempt to disentangle different layers of organization that are at work in the Secret Power project in order to think about the contemporary nexus of media and organization. I will first present a little tour through the exhibition and its montage and mediation of organization and media. And on this basis, I will dwell on the notion of the security entertainment complex in order to outline three modalities of organizing media And I would like to conclude with a brief reflection on what I suggest to call the undemocratic surround of secret power as a ploy of representing organizational forces that increasingly, and Wendy mentioned it already, measure the imperceptible and configure the insensible. So, part one, secret power. Staged in conjunction with the designer David Benowith, Secret Power simultaneously takes place in two venues, the time-honored Biblioteca Nazionale Marciana, right on tourist Inferno San Marco Square. You see one nice image here, and the arrivals lounge of Venice's Marco Polo Airport on the mainland, in the transit space from non-Schengen space, subject to international law, to Schengen space, subject to European law. Now, a lot could be said about that at this particular moment, but I won't go into that. Danny basically dragged and dropped library paintings into the airport, into the floor, which is a very interesting way of reflecting on migration and transit. Anyway, but let me please zoom in on the Renaissance Biblioteca at San Marco Square, completed in 1588. Built in another era of expansionism, empire, and early globalization, it was designed to celebrate culture, knowledge, and science in harmony with civil and military duties, and of course, the church. Its walls are adorned with paintings by then famous artists, Titian, Tintoretto, and Veronese among them, depicting philosophers and thinkers, and its ceilings with allegorical images about the acquisition of knowledge and the role of state, military, and church. This one is called government. Celebrating the medium of the book and of maps, here's Fra Mauro's Map of the World from circa 1450, also in that library. The library's walls and ceilings serve as both ingenious backdrop and iconographic correspondence to how the world is imagined, mapped, and organized according to the National Security Agency and its allies. Assembling what the artist calls a case study exploring NSA visual culture, Danny and Benowith have turned the library into a contemporary server room. The visitor encounters an ensemble of 9 half-empty server racks in plexiglass enclosures that simultaneously work as vitrines and a workstation. There thus is an infrastructural double of hardware and exhibition architecture. The blinking hard drives integrated into the racks are apparently at work, processing data and generating information that the visitors cannot access. We have to make do with what is made visible in the vitrines. Roughly one half of the server vitrines focuses on NSA-related infographics, tools, and plans. The other half on a montage of and interpretations of selected material leaked by Edward Snowden. So, and importantly, some of the stuff on display was found, some was developed by the artist himself based on found material, such as the sculptural works, and some has been commissioned. Nothing here is unprocessed, unremediated. The juxtapositions are impressionistic, circumstantial, and speculative. Relying heavily on commercial printing and prototyping techniques, the atmosphere is brash and vulgar, more trade fair than art space, as if an ethnographic museum would try to display an intelligence agency culture. There's not enough time for a comprehensive look at the wealth of connections, illusions, speculations, and the play of secrecy and transparency that Danny stages. But here I would like at least to offer a few selected impressions and images that, or so I propose, manifest 3 layers of organization and media. The first layer, not surprisingly, is connected to, in Peter Gallison's words, the unlimited escalation of digital surveillance. This is one effect of what Galloway and Thacker have called the new physics of organization and its forms of control and entrainment through protocological organization. I quote, that is as real as pyramidal hierarchy, corporate bureaucracy, representative democracy, sovereign fiat, or any other principle of social and political control, unquote. However, as Danny's installation insinuates, the new physics of organization can be closely intertwined with sovereign rule and bureaucratic control. Networks have become a medium of sovereignty. In this sense, the exhibition pictures the way the globe is protocologically organized and policed. This logic of capture is at work both in state administrations and private corporations, who often actively cooperate, as Snowden has revealed. One focus is, for instance, on Treasure Map, the US-British initiative to map, monitor, and intercept global data traffic, which seeks to create a kind of comprehensive world map of connective devices with many layers of data and metadata. Then he has turned the skull motif of the internal Treasure Map presentation leaked by Snowden into a sculptural piece. Then there are exhibits from and interpretations of various, by now infamous, clandestine operations, such as Fox Acid, Mystic, and Poison Nut, designed to weaponize technology. Here's the exhibition's take on Fox Acid, an operation set up to infiltrate personal computers through the backdoor of commercial internet providers to monitor and record all online activity, even to allow NSA operators to ghostwrite mails and social media postings for their victims, enabling a technologically advanced level of smear campaigning. The mix of cartoons and crude jokes is actually quite unbearable if you are in the exhibition. I have to apologize for some of these images. So the really bad ones I took myself, and the good ones are from my partner and from the web. The layer of the new physics of organization as presented by Secret Power inverts and turns on its head the popular discourse of organizational transparency enabled through digital media. Transparency here does not imply user knowledge of the system, but rather user ignorance. Organizational transparency is not transparency for the public, whatever that is today, but transparency of citizens for state bureaucracies and corporate players, which themselves operate secretly through means of protocological control and intervention. While a media history of organization could be written along different socio-technical formations of secrecy and transparency, for instance, the function of pyramidal hierarchies might actually lie in determining and mediating formal points of exchange and transparency, thereby cloaking the rest of organizational conduct in informality and secrecy. Today's technological apparatuses enable and help to produce, again in Gallison's words, I quote, a form of secrecy with no end date, no limit of scope, and little access. A new ontology of hidden knowledge, multiple infinite secrets for a boundless conflict, unquote. Arguably, it is this layer of organization that, as Geert Loving wrote after the NSA scandal broke, has, quote, dashed to pieces the values of the internet generation, decentralization, peer-to-peer rhizomes, networks, unquote. As Wendy Chun puts it in her forthcoming book, I hope I can quote from a forthcoming book, the power of networks stem from how they are imagined and what they are imagined to do. The second layer of organization and media manifests itself in the visual aesthetics of internal NSA communication, in how a state bureaucracy imagines and renders visible their enemies in their own operations. Steeped in geek gamer tropes, internet memes, historical fantasies, and military and animal imagery, the way that cyber espionage operations are conveyed to NSA's employees and subcontractors is perhaps the viscerally most shocking experience of Danny's handling of this material. As the Treasure Map and the Fox Acid iconography, as well as the maps, magicians, and soldiers that populate the slides leaked by Snowden indicate, the myths, memes, and fantasies of the NSA itself come across as equally dark and brutal, as they are childish, playful, and colorful, and of course heavily remediated. It is remarkable, yet hardly captured on these photos, how these figures and objects are partly at odds with and partly correspond to the allegorical Renaissance paintings in the library, establishing a strange iconographic dialogue of power and knowledge. In any case, the tone of some of the allegorical depictions and all of the NSA material is unashamedly self-congratulatory and drenched in a kind of relentless optimism. Moreover, it should give orthodox management theory pause, but I'm afraid it won't, that the management and leadership models deployed within the NSA and also the British GHCQ, as far as I can see, quite faithfully resemble what students of business and management are confronted with. Perhaps the agencies are at the forefront of a certain kind of instrumental organizational thought, too. Here's a model presented in the GHCQ's The Art of Deception program, also leaked by Snowden and remediated by Denny. Sense-making, we are shown, is of course predicated on perception, attention, and cognition. The sense-making approach, I should add, is a rather prominent way of theorizing how organization works and how processes of organizing unfold. Yet the art of deception bluntly shows what the field of organization studies, it seems, only recently discovered, namely that the making of sense is aesthetically predicated on what can be sensed. It is prone to affective and atmospheric modulation that pre- or subconsciously works on our bodies before cognition and thought kick in. That affective forces are more than ever mediatized, and that forces of organization increasingly work on the level of what Kathleen Hales has called the technological non-conscious, is of course a fairly prominent discussion in contemporary media theory. Intelligence agencies, or at least the Five Eyes of the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, or so we can surmise from Secret Power, know and work with this kind of theorizing. By the way, the GHCQ is also aware of the networked state of the human sciences interested in networks and how they might offer insights for the networked conditions of deceiving. Apart from the protocological physics of organization and the internal organizational processes and their aesthetics, there's a third layer of organization and media that I would like to point to. It seems closely related to Denny's prior work on the digital economy, its processes, subjects, and hyperbolic claims. It pertains to the not-so-secret star of the show, whom Denny and Benowitz stumbled upon in their research and subsequently turned into a centerpiece of the installation. Here is a self-image of designer or entrepreneurial artist, as Denny would probably call him, David D'Archicourt. He's not the one on the wall. Now running his own firm based in Maryland, D'Archicourt was a graphic designer for the NSA from 1996 to 2001 and its creative director of defense intelligence from 2001 to 2012, creating original graphics for NSA top leadership, according to his Behance profile. The server racks assemble work that he has done for and within the agency, some pieces of his freelance work, exhibition designs for the NSA Cryptologic Museum at its headquarters in Fort Meade, and his LinkedIn profile. Furthermore, D'Archicourt has been commissioned by Denny to create graphic representations for what was labeled a New Zealand history project. The designer responded in style. Based on an iconic New Zealand reptile, he has, for instance, come up with this, a grinning cartoon lizard, or perhaps a lizard eagle, with a camera-shaped eye apparatus looking for prey, a kind of cyborg enhancement of the lizard. In the figure of D'Archicourt and through his design and his products, the exhibition presents a both exhilarating and disturbing montage of the marriage of military gamer aesthetics, fantasy culture, disinformation, and libertarianism, a meeting of surveillance and business that is conducted online through platforms such as Behance, Freelancer, and Mechanical Turk. Platforms, it should be noted, that many artists use to commission material. Through the persona of the designer and his works, the exhibition relates the dark operations and imageries of state intelligence agencies to digital culture's demand to become entrepreneurial and apparently deceitful selves. One of the board games on display is called Positive Press. D'Archicourt certainly is a post-media artist at home in different genres, if always with full spectrum colors. As you can perhaps glimpse here, the board game seeks to lead its young users from the down and out dump to upbeat city. where you report the news in a positive way. Positive press, as Chris Kraus has written, is a lurid, disturbing game, simultaneously promoting the libertarian notion of wellness and happiness as healthy personal choices, and instructing primary school children in the rewards and production of spin-controlled disinformation. Also on display, through life skills card games, today's crypto kids, the future code makers and code breakers, learn to dive into social networking in order to become smart sharks. As Nigel Thrift remarks, the effects of what he calls the security entertainment complex are most visible in a media-savvy pedagogy that seeks to, and I quote Thrift, prepare the child for a world in which they will need to be able to present publicly, seek out data, and produce new kinds of significance about what it means to be a subject. They need to be not so much learners of determinate knowledge as little entrepreneurs of on-flow, unquote. Which brings me to the second part of my talk, organizing the security entertainment complex. If the kind of media organizational nexus that emerges from my experience in reading of the exhibition would need a speculative generalized title, I would indeed employ Thrift's notion of the security entertainment complex. It denotes, writes Thrift, and I again quote, an era of permanent and pervasive war and permanent and pervasive entertainment, both sharing the linked values of paranoid vigilance and the correct identification of the potential of each moment. And it would constitute, he goes on to argue, the heart of an authoritarian capitalism that has emerged over the last 20 or 30 years. Based on the ubiquity and availability of data, as well as the means of information targeting, Thrift argues, both security and entertainment sectors share the forms and outcomes of intelligence gathering, its research strategies, and software codes. In this perspective, it is not a surprise that both sectors show comparably lofty growth rates. Agencies of state security and the big players of digital capitalism are therefore the security entertainment complex's main organizational players. Yet the kind of organizational forces at play here work on different levels. First, the secret generation, mapping, and analysis of data is part of a new physics of organization and protocological control. It constitutes a process of organizing beyond and across the boundaries of organizational entities and below the threshold of human perception. The organized world here is constructed through distributed networks that continually and autonomously produce and relate data, put into the informational forms of observations, classifications, profiles, evaluations, and predictions, according to a set of parameters yet otherwise largely devoid of human interference. The corresponding regime of visibility and intelligibility and the distribution of what can be perceived and expressed takes the form of statistical or maybe algorithmic governance. Second, this does not imply, though, that conventional organizational entities disappear or lose influence. Not necessarily, at least. For instance, it has recently been argued that the performativity of algorithms has become central for bureaucratic rule, even a feature of bureaucratization, sorry for that. So the bureaucratic apparatuses have themselves adopted the technologies and imageries of networked organization, which in the case of NSA and the like takes on a particularly perverse spin up to the deliberate modulation of affective states and the engineering of emotions. Third, the figure of Dachicord and the crossover between militaristic and entertainment styles embodies the role of organized networks, to use Ned Rossiter's term, as new agents of entertainment and entrainment in the security entertainment complex, relying on and also a product of the comparably horizontal practices of networked organizing. Here a kind of mobile and entrepreneurial network sociality emerges. In the networked information age, Yochai Benkler has written, there are newfound capacities to act, in his words, in loose commonality with others, unquote. Relationships can be organized unconstrained from price mechanisms or traditional hierarchical models of social and economic organization. Users are certainly modeled and then encouraged to act in certain ways. An entrepreneurialized subject, or as Danny insinuates, an artist of commodification, is called forth. Untied of the boundaries of formal organization as we knew them, he or she combines work and play and aspires to be both individualistic and sociable, autonomous and embedded, responsible and adaptive, perpetually happy, target-driven and perhaps deceitful. As a way of pulling these strings together, I like to think that Danny's immersive installation can also be read as an inversion of what Fred Turner has called the democratic surround, the emergence of multimedia environments as forms of democratic communication, developed during World War II by state agencies, intellectuals, and artists in the US. The democratic surround was designed to usher in the new man as democratic citizen who would weather the detrimental effects of the mass media, as could be observed in Germany, of course, at that time. It would later bleed into the democratic surround would later bleed into the counterculture and the multimedia utopianism of the 1960s. Secret Power's post-media assemblage actualizes the relation between art, organization, and social transformation. Yet the democratic surround has become a security entertainment surround, and the new man and maybe an entrepreneurial orcman or an entrepreneurial orc woman. This surround is produced through different layers or modalities of organization, processes of invisible protocological organizing that are built to identify, classify, and sometimes taint or destroy human beings, networked organizations and organized networks as transformed or new forms of organization that increasingly rely on technical media also as means of effective modulation and control, and a networked horizontal mode of organizing entrepreneurial subjects, little entrepreneurs of onflow. Finally, the notion of surround allows me to ponder the thorny issue of how to research and represent today's invasive media and the operations on invisible and preconscious, or non-conscious, to use Hale's term, levels. How do we render what partly seems beyond or before representation? How do we write or perform organization under these conditions? On the one hand, it seems a commonplace to point out that much of what was once regarded as the domain of social science, namely generating and analyzing data, is now in one form or another available to and carried out by the security entertainment complex, agencies of state, and of course Google, Facebook, and the like. A kind of perverse success story, actually, of scholarly inventions that have now bypassed their inventors. In a memorable turn of phrase, Alexander Galloway has spoken of the subsequent emergence of low-agency scholars. Low-agency scholars are de-skilled and proletarianized researchers who are unable to make valid claims, meaning numerically valid statements extracted from adequate measurement devices and data sets. On the other hand, in a text titled Are Some Things Unrepresentable?, Galloway has taken issue with Jacques Rancière's doubts about the trope of unrepresentability in an earlier text likewise titled Are Some Things Unrepresentable? Since data have no visual form, it is on the level of information where visualization takes place. Yet, Galloway argues, depictions of information networks all look the same. They all adhere to a uniform set of aesthetic codes. There is no proper poetics of information networks, he argues, and thus of today's societies of control, of the organizational forces that increasingly measure the imperceptible and configure the insensible. Hence the dilemma of unrepresentability. For Galloway, there is no or only one, which amounts to the same in the 0-1 principle, form of mediation between brute data masses and the visualization of information. I wonder, though, whether Danny's Secret Power does not offer a potential response to both worries, at least from a social sciencey point of view. As Anna Monster has commented, what in my talk is called protocological organization works imminently or intensively beyond perception and extensively through relations with other social and technical elements. The symbolic and representational level is therefore secondary or even tertiary. Indeed, it is on this secondary or tertiary level where Denny's assemblage of images, objects, texts, and sculptural renderings work. So these are neither works of media genealogy or media ecology, nor experiments in data undermining, to use Munster's term. Denny does not engage with mapping systems or networks or writing counter-protocological code. As noted, it is a kind of anthropology of media culture that assembles, remediates, and reorganizes aspects of this culture into the different contexts of art spaces. In this sense, much in line with Rancière's diagnosis of a general availability of all artistic forms in media whatsoever. The undemocratic surround of secret power performs an act of reverse espionage, for instance, by constructing a speculative portrait of d'Archicourt through his work, his traces online, and the leaked material. This way, what usually circulates unobserved through the network sphere takes on a strange visibility and palpability, is slowed down, open to processes of association. It is by gathering, alienating, and juxtaposing material in a different context, then, that contradictions, visibilities, and perhaps a critique of invasive media can emerge. It allows us to think back, as it were, to the new physics of organization underneath of what is given to the human sensorium. And of course, as visitors, we are provoked to engage in our very own pedestrian, perhaps intelligence agency-like trawling through data and imagery, trying to connect dots and recognize patterns. It is a strangely seductive and uncanny exercise. This kind of artistic research therefore posits a possible case of what the low agency scholars of the social sciences, denuded of access to the data masses and of the tools to analyze them, can do. Thrift calls this the enactment of cultural probes that, in his words, can help people to rework the world by suggesting new unorientations rather than correctives, a research labor of suggestion, curiosity, and wondering. So to come to the end, exploring the modalities of organizing, the interrelations and representations offers, or so I hope, a promising way of tackling organize as a term of media. If there is no organization without media, then the study of organization needs to embrace the role and effects of technical mediation on different levels of relational organizing. And the study of media, of course I'm out of my element now, what do we see and how do we look when we engage with media through the notion of organization? Well, I hope we see at least four things, very briefly. First, sociality appears, and social or socio-technical transformation. I have read, and Florian has mentioned it, that the social would constitute the blind spot of media theory. Well, posing the question of organization ushers in the social and its reverberations, indeed. Second, situatedness appears. Studying the relational socio-technical ordering and being ordered of humans, materials, effects, and techniques can only be done site-specifically and context-specifically. I am, of course, aware that we are dealing with distributed sites today. In this sense, it is a fairly modest endeavor. Third, contemporaneity appears. While I would love to see more media historical studies of organization, the notion of organizing as outlined here offers a tool to investigate and perhaps intervene in contemporary modes of ordering the social. In this claim to contemporaneity, it is perhaps a rather immodest endeavor then. Fourth, multiplicity appears, or as Lisa mentioned in the talk this morning, heterogeneity, which is a similar argument, I think. There is no single logic governing, say, the use of algorithms, just as there are no single modes of ordering in organizational settings, as numerous studies of organization and processes of organizing have shown. Therefore, transmitting the differential traits of what I have presented as modalities or layers of media technologically enabled organizing needs to go further. In this sense, I'm afraid that my narrative here was far too clear-cut. One should not forget, or I should not forget, that post-digital societies are not only a field of advanced techniques and strategies of manipulation, surveillance, and control. As Tiziana Terranova wrote, and Marcel yesterday showed, actually, they still, one hopes, offer plenty of opportunities for experimentation with political tactics and forms of organization. Thank you.